Hello everyone, this is Jim Williams with my annual Hurricane City landfall predictions. Last year I did not produce a video but rather sent a list of my top 20 to my donation list. In any given hurricane season, any landmass in the Atlantic Basin can be severely impacted by a hurricane. Last year the Northwest Bahamas were pummeled by Hurricane Dorian with winds of 185 miles per hour. Great Abaco Island and Grand Bahama were devastated. Going into the 2020 season, will it be the Caribbean that gets impacted? Will it be Central America? Will it be the United States? Maybe the Bahamas again. But all of these areas have been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the United States. So I understand anxiety is high going into the 2020 season, thus the reason that I am producing a video this year. People familiar with my videos know that they usually start out with a flashy musical presentation going back over my past years of predictions and how successful they've been. But due to the fact that they've been so successful for so many years, it's taking up far too much space at the beginning of these videos to show all the tracks and what ended up happening, so I've decided to skip that this year. So quickly, here's the last 3 hurricane seasons, starting at the bottom. 2017, my number 3 pick, Marathon, Florida, was hit very hard by Hurricane Irma, a major hurricane. 2018, my number 2 pick, Wilmington, North Carolina, was hit dead on by Hurricane Florence. And last year, my number 1 pick, Bermuda, was hit by major Hurricane Umberto. And look at number 6 on that list on the moderate category, Great Abaco Island, Bahamas, and we all know what happened there with Hurricane Dorian. For 2020, I'm expecting 18 to 20 named storms in the Atlantic Basin. And I'm not going to get into the classification of what is going to be, how many are hurricanes versus tropical storms, because that's not the way my predictive process works. It's all based on named storms only. This is my 18th year making landfall predictions, and this is only the second time out of those 18 years that 4 out of my top 5 locations to be impacted this year are outside of the United States. The last time I made this type of a prediction was back in 2007. And you can see from that year, 2 majors impacted Central America. Belize was my number 2 pick. So here's the chart that I draw up before each hurricane season and choose 20 locations out of the 140 locations in the Hurricane City database, which is the front page of Hurricane City. So how do I arrive at my top 20? Well, I take all the 140 cities in the database and use these 8 criteria above the red bar, and you need to match at least one of these criteria for each city to crack the top 20. Sometimes there's a tiebreaker situation which goes by the weight of each criteria, which is too long to explain here, but it's broken down pretty precisely to these top 20. The column to the left represents the order of the top 20. The obvious next column is the list of all the cities and islands that I've chosen for the top 20, which is then followed by the 8 criteria. Now what happens is all these top 20 cities will actually compete against each other for who wins the most columns. Starting with the column number 3, which is seasons since 1990 with 18 plus named storms. You can see there are 3 cities that are tied at 71% of the time that they get impacted when there's 18 plus named storms. Now the next column over is based on ENSO analog years. What I do is go back in history and look at all the El Nino, La Nina events and try to pick 10 years that match what's currently happening right now. So out of those 10 years, all these 20 cities get calculated to figure out if they were impacted in any of those 10 years. And the percentages listed, and the winners in that category are Ocean City, Maryland, and Norfolk, Virginia. My ENSO predictions are based on a neutral season for the equatorial Pacific ENSO region of temperatures between 0.3 and 0.6 below normal based on model projections. When I first started doing these predictions back in 2003, this next column used to be the most heavy-weighted predictor of all the 8 criteria, and that is this city or island due or overdue for a named storm? And you can see the winner in this category is 9 years overdue, and that is the Cayman Islands. The next category over are for hurricanes only, and the winner in this category, ABC Islands down near South America, they get hit by a hurricane directly once about every 30 years. So for them to be this much overdue is really astounding. This next column over is based on the average number of named storms since 1990. Looking at this color-coded graphic, you can clearly see the 18-plus named storm type seasons impact areas such as the northeastern Yucatan Peninsula and the upper Texas coastline. And as you can see, the winner in this category is Galveston, Texas, when there's an average of 18.16 named storms since 1990. Since I started doing these predictions in 2003, there are only 2 years in which none of my top 5 were impacted. That was 2013 and 2014. So at that time, I decided to add another criteria into the mix, and that is the North Atlantic Oscillation. Now, the current trend and predictions indicate that it'll be slightly below average, or in other words, negative. And according to NC State, a negative NAO indicates weakening of both the Icelandic low and the Azores high, which decreases the pressure gradient across the North Atlantic. It also creates a situation where you have more troughing over the eastern United States, so there could be quite a few more recurvatures this year than we normally see. So surprise, surprise, guess who wins this category, and that is St. Pierre, Newfoundland, because of the amount of recurvatures. 78% of the time since 1990, when there's been a negative NAO, this area has been impacted. This next column is a real doozy. It's trends since 1871. So what I do is go back through all 140 cities in the database and go and research if there's any trends, such as have they been impacted 3 years in a row, if they've just been impacted 2 years in a row. If they were hit by a tropical storm 2 years ago, how many times 2 years later were they impacted by a named storm? Things such as that. So there's a lot of work that's involved with figuring out this column. Only 5 out of the 20 cities and islands that I picked had a trend going back to 1871. So there is a tiebreaker in this column, and that's between Morehead City, North Carolina, and Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Both have been impacted 3 years in a row, 10 times since 1871. And finally, the last column is rather simplistic. It's just basically listing any of these top 20 that were in last year's top 20, and the winner in this category is the Cayman Islands. They were number 13 last year, and they have moved up significantly this year. You'll see the list in a minute. So if you notice the yellow highlighted areas on the chart, 5 of the 8 criteria are in Cancun, Mexico, far more than any of the others in the top 20 here. Most of them have 4 out of 8, some have 3 out of 8, some have 2 out of 8. But this is the winner, number 1, Cancun, Mexico, is going to be number 1 on my list this year. So the cities and islands with 4 out of 8 criteria are St. Pierre, Newfoundland, the Cayman Islands, and Manzanillo, Cuba. So then, for example, I'll take those 3 areas and then have them go against each other for who is the highest in each category on this graph. So there's a lot involved with this, and I don't want to get into every single detail of how this is broken down. I hope I've explained it clear enough that this is not just throwing dust in the air and seeing where it lands. There's a lot of calculations that go into figuring out my top 20. So here we go, numbers 20 through number 1. So I usually create a map to indicate what I think is going to happen as far as tracks in the upcoming hurricane season. 2016, I pretty much nailed the Matthew track. 2017, the Irma track. 2018, the indication of the Northeast Gulf of Mexico, which I thought would happen earlier rather than later, but the concept was still there. I did not produce one last year, but this year I'm thinking we could see a track similar to a Gilbert Allen type situation for the Caribbean Sea, going into the Gulf of Mexico and affecting Texas. I have a concern for Texas this year. We also could see something maybe late in the season form in the Gulf of Mexico and head up over the eastern seaboard. That could be a big, powerful system as well. And there's all kinds of tracks that could happen during the hurricane season. Anybody is vulnerable. Everybody is equally vulnerable. This is just a video to kind of give an idea of my thinking based on calculations only. It's not, it's just throwing dust in the air, but it has been very successful over the years. Not precise, but a general indication of what could be expected during an upcoming hurricane season. This map is available on the front page of Hurricane City. Use the drop-down menus, choose Hurricane Tracking, and right below the tracking map, you'll see Jim's City Predictions, and it'll open up a GIS map where you can zoom in on this map and click on each number, and it'll tell you the reason why I chose these locations. We simply do not know at this time how much of an impact the COVID-19 pandemic will have in any of these areas, including the Caribbean and Mexico, at the height of the hurricane season. That's when I expect a lot of this activity to take place, around the height and going later into the season. Have a plan ready, know where you're going to go. I heard that the hotels are an option for evacuation. The problem with that is, from my experiences, hotels tend to get booked rather quickly when hurricanes are coming in, so I don't know if they're going to be able to use schools and maybe separate people in different classrooms. You're going to have to wear your mask more than likely, so be prepared for that. If you don't absolutely have to evacuate, don't. But if you're in a high water area, it's good to have a plan to get away from the coast as these approach. So anyway, that's it. Good luck, everybody, this hurricane season. We'll be thinking about you. I'll have updates throughout the season. I'm Jim Williams. Thank you for watching.